You have queued up the Roulette Tapes, a program of adventurous music and conversation recorded at the New York City Concert Hall, Roulette. You can hear thousands of concert recordings from Roulette's past and present and find news of upcoming events celebrating innovation and imagination at roulette.org. Aren't you curious?
In this edition of the Roulette Tapes, the music of vocalist, composer, and electronic musician Charmaine Lee, with commentary on and excerpts from 4 performances at the Roulette Concert Hall in Brooklyn from 2017 to 2021. We'll hear bits of the works Ceremony and Papillae, an appearance at the Resonant Bodies Festival, plus solos and collaborations with violist Joanna Mattrey, cellist Lester St. Louis, trumpeter Nate Wooley, and electronics with Conrad Tao. And now, Charmaine Lee.
Hey, my name is Charmaine Lee. I am a vocalist and electronic artist, and I have been known to be called the Deviant. I grew up in Sydney, Australia. My parents migrated from Hong Kong in the 80s, and they raised my brother and I there. I grew up there until I left for college when I was 19. I went to Princeton for my undergrad. I studied sociology, but I'd always had this passion for music. I played classical guitar quite seriously in high school, and my parents are both super musical folks, and my dad's an amateur jazz guitarist, and my brother's name is Miles for Miles Davis, so it really ran in the family. And then my mum played the timpani in the Hong Kong Youth Orchestra, so super musical family, and I grew up a lot with that in my house. And for me, voice and singing always came naturally, but it's something I'd never really explored formally in that sense. And then when I got to college, I joined a few jazz ensembles and started really getting serious about voice. And naturally, sort of in that sense, after graduating, I really wanted to pursue it in a more formal fashion. And so I ended up applying to the New England Conservatory. I had heard it was an incredible program. I had this vision initially of wanting to be sort of a modern jazz singer. At the time, I was kind of what you'd consider a late bloomer. I had never heard of most folks in the avant-garde world. At that point, I was listening to Mariah Carey and Whitney Houston and sort of my favorite kind of vocal divas, but then, had gotten really into sort of the modern jazz world, a la Gretchen Paletto, Robert Glasper, and a lot of the music I was writing at the time was like, major 7 shuffle 11s scattered everywhere and sort of odd time signatures. And then when I got to NEC, I signed up on a whim for an ensemble, but led by Joe Morris, and it was called the Properties of Free Music. And in the description, it said, we'll learn the music of Anthony Braxton, Eric Dolphy, Steve Lacy, Ornette Coleman, etc. And I'd heard about all of these names, but had never really dived deep into their music. And so in that ensemble, we played through the music of all the folks I mentioned and more. And I started to learn about Joe's sort of style and method of improvisation, which he kind of calls a meta methodology. And essentially, what it is distilled is when you are improvising with someone else, you're in sort of one of 5 different states. You're either soloing, juxtapositioning, complementing, in unison, or you're silent. And I think in that process, I became completely, my mind just exploded. I finally sort of found a style and a process that enabled me to not only build my own practice and think about language in a very different way, but also helped me engage people who came from, I play whatever God tells me to play, to, conservatory background, to folks who, specialized in sort of jazz language. And so it gave me the broadest possible and yet specific framework to interact with other people coming from lots of different backgrounds and interests. So I really sort of started getting all of these different obsessions and sort of interests and synergizing them into this language that became the basis of what I use today.
Yow.
A common question I get is sort of, how do you practice? Like, what is the process here if you're not sort of shedding scales, or how do you sort of think about building this language, and how do you then refine it and work on it? And for me, a lot of it is thinking about combinations of things. So what I usually do is I will literally just work through mechanically hundreds of different combinations, moving from microphone to microphone, moving from long durational idea to short sort of frenetic motions, thinking very sort of modularly about language. If I want to, take a certain idea and break it apart and develop it, thinking very micro, but then zooming out into the macro. And so a lot of my processes are really built on sort of thinking about how many ways can I combine these different approaches, such that when I sit down in the performance itself, I can kind of deploy it ad hoc depending on what feels true to that moment. Folks who see me live kind of understand that there's an implicit dynamic and relationship with the voice and the microphone for me. So it's really about amplification. I think my interests and my sound right now is very much built upon that. So I think what maybe differs between me and sort of other vocalists in this art form is their sort of acoustic manifestation of their technique is kind of a very central point, whereas for me, my interests are very much rooted in the amplification aspect and how can I use microphones really sort of as an instrument in and of itself. Well, it took me many years. I went through many years avoiding melody, words, anything that sort of was recognizable. I think for many years, just felt not authentic. That relationship was not authentic to me at that point in terms of why I should be using them. And so I think I went through kind of an austere period of time where I was like, no melody, no words that make any sense. And I think only now, in the past couple of years, have I finally sort of come to and come back to it and have found this authentic way to have that be in relationship with that and actually have that be a part of my vocabulary and know that I can go to that range and go to that place and evoke the whatever those words are that I choose to use at that time, and know that it is in the service of what I'm trying to sort of say in a larger sense.
It's the year of
Just interestingly, I was reflecting on my performances at Roulette as a whole, and I find that they've actually been very important checkpoints for me over the years. I think my first ever sort of real performance in New York City was at Roulette. It was a solo set with a duo with both Nate Wooley and then also Conrad Tao, which sort of started the whole relationship that I have with Conrad lasting, today and beyond. But I think Roulette in general has been these kind of artistic check marks for me, and sort of these ways for me to look back and think, okay, what has been the development? And I think you can really see that. I mean, from the first performance, I just had a microphone. I was just figuring out kind of how this vocabulary was working. Conrad had an electronic setup, and he was also figuring out for the first time, how do I do live processing? Like, what is sampling? And so when I look back and I look at the most recent performance, I mean, I had a modular synthesizer, I had a sampler, I was using 5 different microphones. I mean, just on a landscape, perspective, it's become so rich in that way. And I think the vocabulary has just really, really deepened since that point. In 2017, I did a Roulette performance with Lester St. Louis and Joanna Mattrey. Joanna and Lester are both some of the most unique improvisers that I know, and people who I feel have learned how to channel their personalities to speak through. I almost feel like their instruments are incidental to the actual fact of how they approach sound and their mind. And what I love especially about Lester, but Joanna too, is I always appreciate artists who are not afraid to traverse the entire kind of emotional landscape. I often feel like in sort of serious music, joy is sort of widely denigrated in sort of this world, and it's so unique and rare for me to find artists who know that this is also really funny, but also sad, and also kind of hardcore. So I think that ability to kind of roam the full spectrum, I think emotionally and in energy, is something that I really appreciate, and I think both Joanna and Lester do that very, very well. I sort of avoided using any forms of live processing for about 5 or 6 years when I was first starting. I think I felt not ready, and I think I had wanted to develop the foundation of my instrument in a way that I felt super strong and confident about it before, thinking about the ways that technology can kind of accentuate and augment those things. And so Papillae was a real check, again, sort of a checkpoint for me in sort of figuring out, okay, how far and how deep can I augment and distend and sort of use technology to then sort of highlight so much of this vocabulary that I've been working on for several years. So at that point, it was still during the pandemic, and I started to use the radio as a real reminder of life that was happening around me, and sort of the site specificity of it was very special. Preparation is essential, but then at the end of the day, the priority is presence. And I think as improvisers, the true metric for a successful performance is really were you present, and did you commit to every decision you made, even if it falls flat and it doesn't work. But at the end of the day, you have to trust that the listener is there for the journey of that and not sort of looking to see whether or not you've slipped. I think Joe once told me, classified it as, when you're improvising, you want to bring yourself almost to the edge of nowhere, where you are a second away from everything just collapsing, and yet you are right there at that edge. And for me, I think that speaks so true to how I feel. It's that, and maybe I'm psychotic or something, but I find a lot of joy kind of being at the edge of nowhere, right, sort of that level of risk-taking where this whole thing could just completely disintegrate if I lapse in sort of the focus and commitment. And I feel this sense of real life-affirming energy when I'm at that edge.
No. This. I cannot. The sky. Darkness bewilders me.
The music of vocalist, composer, and electronic musician Charmaine Lee. These recordings have been preserved as part of Roulette's Concert Archives project, made possible in part with support of the National Endowment for the Arts. This is David Weinstein at the desk. Thanks to Charmaine Lee and everyone listening.
You have been listening to the Roulette Tapes, a program of adventurous music and conversation. This series is produced by Roulette Intermedium. You can find thousands of concert recordings from Roulette's archives and news of upcoming events at roulette.org.